Welcome back, fellow audio enthusiasts. It is I, Jason, your host of 2-Channel Listening. Yes, today, part 3 of a 4-part series of the Harbeth speakers. In part 1, you learned the why and the how I pivoted my channel to speaking about the entire Harbeth lineup, save for the M40s, with my purchase of these 30th anniversary M30s. Please go back and check that out if you have the time. In part 2, my friends at the Music Room in Ayre, Colorado, they were generous enough to donate a demo pair of P3ESR XD speakers for an extended period of time to basically kind of sum up how I feel those little mini monitors stack up in the Harbeth lineup against their bigger brothers. Today, it is the HL Compact 7ES3 XD. For the love of God, Alan Shaw, would you please change the nomenclature on these speakers before you release the next generation? Thank you. Oh my God. Nevertheless, 7ES3s. Let's get to it. I have to get serious. I have to get serious talking about the 7ES3s. And here's a problem I have. A problem already? Ooh, okay. Here's the problem I have. I feel like I'm having a deja vu moment. We have to go back in time to when I first started this channel early on, and I reviewed a pair of the Alta Audio IOs. Those smaller silver stand mount speakers that at that time retailed for $3,500. I was very harsh to those speakers, but again, I feel I was very fair in my conclusion of saying that those speakers were better than the sum of their parts, and boy did I take them to task on what parts made up those particular speakers. I have to have a parallel line with the 7ES3s here. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just deal with a few facts, shall we? These are the latest iteration of the 7ES. Okay, so these were stamped with these are 2020 speakers. That's when these were produced. My 30th anniversary M30s over here were basically put together, tested, and sold in 2008, even though the EXO board is a 2007. So let's just deal with a couple of facts. And I actually took pictures for you. I don't care what the paper specs say. These smaller cabinet, smaller form factor M30s, even though they have the 8-inch radial driver, these are 28 pounds each. The bigger, higher cubic volume 7ES3 is only 26 pounds. It's a 2-pound difference between these speakers. Now the obvious is the cabinet is thicker. The sidewalls are thicker, the baffle's thicker, the back wall is much thicker than the 7ES. And albeit it has a very small internal bracing that goes through the center of the M30, whereas there's zero bracing within the 7ES3. So let's do the knuckle wrap test. I know it's very unscientific, but it actually says a lot more than you think it does. So 7ES. Okay, you heard that. You had to have heard that. There's a deeper, more thud-like damping with the 7ES. This thinner walled cabinet, this lossy box, definitely has more damping to it versus the higher ring factor of the M30. That's very interesting. The M30 is the more expensive speaker. It's obviously more substantial when you pick it up, but there's a little bit of a higher ring factor to that cabinet. Did that play into how I felt about the M30 when I reviewed it? Maybe so, but nevertheless, that's one thing to deal with. Fact number 2, and this is why I brought up the Alta IOs. This is really why I brought up the Alta IOs. the crossover between these two speakers. I have to do a side-by-side. I'm going to throw the picture up so that you can see it. My viewers can see an exact side-by-side of the crossover between these two speakers. This is no joke. I could not believe what I saw. Look at the little yellow highlight box. What do you see? My 30th anniversary M30s, that crossover board was built in 2007. The 2020 7ES3s, the crossover board is the exact same crossover board from 2007, folks. Now, take that a step further, you can see the much larger iron core inductors in the M30 versus the little inductors in the 7ES. So, here's where I get a little pissy. Today's numbers, this is a $4,900 speaker, and it's in its, upteenth generation, and hyperbole here. Alan Shaw likes to say that he goes in and he tweaks those crossovers with each iteration, maximizing the flatness scale of what these speakers can do. Now, from a value proposition, I look at those parts, I can just hear Danny with that Texas twang. There's a lot of cheese in that there speaker. Talking about those crossovers, those are some seriously cheap parts in the 7ES3. Now, I get the efficiency of the iron cores in the M30. I'm not going to debate that. However, fact number 3. It is what it is. And what I mean by it is what it is, how the 7ES3 performed in my 11 by 11 room, they outperform my 30th anniversaries, bar none. Not even close. And what I mean by not even close is I didn't have the anomalies. I didn't have the level of difficulty with my component interaction and having to find the perfect synergy between front end gear, room placement, etc., etc., etc. As a drop it and play it speaker, the 7ES3 are superior compared to my M30s. The M30s demand the best gear, the best source material to get the best playback out of them. And even at that level, it's mostly genre specific. I did not have that issue with the 7ES3 XDs. They really gave me a lot more than I expected, not speaking about the price, compared to how high the bar I thought was set for the M30s. Now, as a quick comparator, I did throw in the Super HL5 Plus just for a couple of days, just to kind of verify what I was hearing with the 7s versus the M30s. I'm not going to talk about the 5s yet. While 5 Hertz on paper doesn't sound like much, where these roll off at 50 Hertz, but they had a very sharp bloom and bump between, I'm going to say 150 to 300 Hertz in my room, where it got kind of nagging and it wasn't pleasant for long periods of time. When played at above 85 dB, mind you, I did not have that issue with I did not have that issue with the 7ES3s. That extra 5 Hertz, it plays deeper. You're getting more slam. It is very tight. I didn't have the bloom, and I was just extremely pleased with the bass response. Even second, third, and fourth interaction in the room. Not an issue with the smaller room, while I was expecting there to be some issues. I have to say this, for you genre snobs, you need to move on. Where the M30s are a career speaker for somebody to love and hold for many, many years, I feel this is a very genre-specific speaker. Now, I said I know that they can do rock and they can do a lot of things if they're in the right room with the right gear, with the right synergy. There's a lot of caveats there. There's like 17 caveats when I write it all out. Whereas these were nearly caveatless speakers. There's only one thing that I would call a demerit from how I like my speakers to sound, and that was just in the more forward nature of the presentation. So between the little P3s, the M30s, the 7s, and the big 5s, the 7s were the only speaker of the 4 sets that played rather at the baffle with certain source material, or even, I would say, 2 feet forward of the baffle in my room. The M30s, they played within the plane or even behind the speakers. The P3s are just, they're the perfect little monitors that have a great deep sound stage. And the 5s they're out of this world. I'm not even going to talk about, again, the 5s just, that's part 4. If there's a demerit, it's the little bit of that forward nature that I was surprised that the 7s have. And it didn't matter what I did with the toe-in. It didn't matter if I pushed them back a few inches or forward a few inches. They kind of were what, they kind of act how they are, and I would figure that's mostly a part of the crossover. Here's where they also beat the M30s, much like the P3. These are very gear agnostic speakers. Now, going to the core of what my channel is, it's easy to say that, oh my gosh, the 7ES with my balanced audio technology tube amp and preamp and my Ayre audio SACD player were fantastic. Guess what, folks? The Audioquest DM5s were fantastic with that same expensive type of gear. If I put my most expensive gear with the Audioquest $300 vintage speakers, they sound pretty damn good. That's just a fact. The better the front end gear, generally you're going to get a lot out of cheaper speakers. Now, when you have really well-built high-end speakers, the sky's the limit on the kind of gear that you can attach to it. So, for demonstration speak, I used my older generation Peachtree, the early generation, the Novapre, the early generation 220 amp, the Class D amp. That's a pretty old amp by Peachtree standards now. And because the older generation DAC in the Peachtree Nova was, to my ears, after 3 songs, unlistenable, new DAC technology crushes old DAC technology, and that's where my little $200 Arylic S50 Pro Plus streamer comes into play. So that little Arylic does all of the DAC and the streaming to the Novapre, which is basically at this point, it's just volume control directly to the Peachtree Class D amplifier. What do those 3 pieces go together? Also with very entry-level Audioquest cables. We're talking the towers, those are $35. And the evergreens are $45. So you've got an $1,100 on the used market front end connected to these $5,000 speakers. No problems. Not that good with these. No problems with these. I could listen for extended periods of time within reason, not going to 90 dB, and everything played just as I would expect it to. So from the value proposition, for you new folks, for you new aspiring enthusiasts out there, you're trying to figure out, where do I put my money at? Do I put it mostly towards speakers? Do I put it mostly towards the front end gear? This audio enthusiast is going to say, put the bulk of your budget towards speakers you think you're going to love, that you think you're going to like, and let that front end gear sort itself out as you get money and you're able to upgrade along the way. Said another way, look, I am the guy who's about value and finding awesome used pieces of gear. I'm going to go back to the Peachtree Nova 150. Right now you can find several of them on Audiogon, US Audio Mart, Canuck, Reverb, etc., between $900 and $1,100. Has a great DAC in it. It's a great integrated amplifier. You could buy one of those, attach those to a Harbeth, and you're going to have bliss for a very long time, especially if you attach it to something like a C7ES3. So They're characteristic. And let's talk about a few of my favorite tunes because you want to know about that. So for those Lucinda Williams fans out there, you must know of Gurf Morlix. That's a crazy name, but you must know about Gurf Morlix. There's a song of his, two songs really, from Last Exit to Happy Land that are always in rotation for me because I appreciate his songwriting abilities and I appreciate the story he tells in his songs. Crossroads is one of those very specific songs where I feel like I'm listening to somebody just telling me a story. With these speakers, with the 7ES and their slightly forward nature, but the unmistakable characteristic of the Harbeth mid-range, the Harbeth vocals, Gurf is telling me his story as only he can. And there's texture there. Mind you, these are very laid-bare tracks. And there's not a lot of differentiation between his tracks. And what I mean by that is the actual arrangement of the songs. There's not a whole lot of difference between each of his songs. He is a long-time singer-songwriter, but he really didn't get into making his own albums until much later in his life. He's in his 70s now, but the man knows how to write some songs. And I'm just telling you, listen to the Crossroads or listen to One More Second by him. There's a connection there. There's an absolute connection between how realistic the vocals sound and you're listening to a story unfolding and you're not on your tablet, you're not on your smartphone, you're not paying attention to something else. You're listening to the nuance of what's within that story and you're hearing it again in from a different context. That's what I get out of that. Here's one off the wall out of left field. The Essential Chieftains. Yes, the Chieftains. Listening to O'Sullivan's March. I couldn't not play that and feel transported back a few centuries. There's something in those songs, there's something in that drum line and with just that arrangement and the rawness that you feel you're hearing something that's been played the same way for several centuries. And this is where the 7ES can absolutely trump the P3s, no doubt. And they also, with the extra 5 hertz, trumps the M30s, is with the power of the drums in O'Sullivan's March. I played that tune because I wanted to hear the rawness of the drums, that beat, that ancestral beat. The room interaction, no overhang, spot on, great power, not super HL5 plus power, but great power, great decay. Actually played very large, and the roll off, almost like thunder with those drum beats. I was very impressed with what this 8-inch radial driver does do, and it nailed it for that particular song. Speaking of something else that's near and dear to my heart, and this is maybe a weird one for you guys, The Motels, Only the Lonely. Back when I was a teenager in my late teens, that's one of those songs that I don't know, it was like it felt like an anthem to me at that time. We all have particular songs that you get emotional with, and for whatever reason, there's something about that song when the connection is there and it's played with these speakers. I'm back in my late teens, feeling what I felt, knowing what I knew, and that is a high goosebump factor for me and a huge hurdle for a lot of speakers to overcome, and the 7ES did it for me. It's strange, I know, but Only the Lonely is one of those songs that it's very transportative for me. Switching gears and talking about the male vocals. We're going to heat it up a little bit. Chris Isaak, Blue Spanish Sky. Blue Spanish Sky, Chris Isaak. Whew. You know, if there's ever a man crush in listening to some male vocals, that dude with these speakers, the depth. Here's where the source material actually shines through and is not a detriment with the bit of the forwardness of how the 7ES3s are. Chris Isaac's vocals are so laser focused and are so space and perception appropriate, again within my room, and even with the Peachtree gear. I had to try it again with the Peachtree gear. Nothing to complain about whatsoever. It played where I would expect it to play, and I know you guys see my little pink dot over here, but his vocals came just above there, just behind the speakers, and I'm there. I'm in this cafe listening to Chris Isaak. You've got the fake reverberance of the room that you know is very pleasing to the ears, that give off that space. That's where the 7ES3s really shine. They, again, Harbeth, they know how to take vocals and transport you to as if you're in this intimate setting. Depending on the source and depending on the genre, you feel an intimacy with that music. That's a rarity. Not a lot of speakers can do that. Some of them do it really well. Some of them can do it better than others. At these price points, it's very impressive with what the Harbeth's do. And that's why I did this major pivot from a lot of the other types of rock speakers and other stand mount speakers that I've reviewed in the past. Now, the main theme, the sweet spot. I have to say that the 7ES3s, the XDs, are the sweet spot in the lineup. They're not going to like this. I'm going to say, and I know there's so many M30 fans out there, and if you have a big enough room with that really expensive front end gear, I can understand why there's career owners of those speakers. They're not for me after having heard these, and certainly after having spent some time with the Super HL5 Plus, but that's part 4. I won't call these aspiration speakers. That's not a big enough of a stretch, even though, yes, I know they're $5,000 to buy them new. When I start to talk about the Super HL5 Plus as an aspiration speakers, the big jump in price from these over the M30s to the Super HL5 Plus, now we're talking aspiration type territory. I have a hard time justifying the M30's price for what you're getting for what I'm going to say is a genre-specific speaker. If you want a do-it-all speaker that's a stand mount, the sweet spot is with the 7ES3. There's just, in my mind, that's where I'm at right now until, you know, I hear the next generation of totem fires or whatever else is going to come up at, you know, a more expensive price point, because let's just face it, things are getting drastically more expensive every 6 months in the year 2020 and going into 2023. So we have to steel ourselves against just, that's where things are headed, where the value plays at when speakers get traded in, what is going to be the better value for you in the type of front end gear that you have and where your budget's at. Buy the better speaker, upgrade your front end gear when you can. You will be pleased at what these can do with even cheaper budgetary gear connected to them. The M30s already have a new home. Thank you, Mr. Edwin. And the 7ES3 will be my standard bearer for the time being in this room. Now, I'm going to move on to part 4, the Super HL5 Plus. It'll be a few more weeks before I release that video, mostly because I don't want to give the speakers back to the music room until they start asking me for them. I'm kind of sorry they showed up in my room because I don't want to give those up right now. Nevertheless, I hope you can enjoy my no bullshit attitude. I tell you what I have, I tell you what I get, I tell you what I like, and I'll call out manufacturers when I feel I need to call them out for cheesy parts. It is what it is. That's what this channel is all about. If there's a better value out there that I come across it, I'm going to let you know. Until next time, folks, thank you so much. Please have a wonderful week, and I'll see you in the future.